Have you ever wondered what truly happens when the stadium lights fade and the biggest boy band in the world finally opens their eyes to a brand new day? We always see BTS looking perfectly flawless on screen, but behind their heavily guarded doors, a wildly chaotic and profoundly human reality exists. Thanks to a former assistant who has finally spilled the ultimate tea, we are exposing the bizarre, intensely personal morning routines of these 7 global icons. Do they wake up looking as majestic as they do on stage, or is it just pure, unfiltered morning messiness? Who spends their first hour staring blankly at the ceiling, contemplating their existence, and who instantly brings explosive, unstoppable energy the second their feet hit the floor? Are you prepared to discover the raw, unseen truth behind their messy morning hair? Number 7. RM, the clumsy philosopher. A morning of chaos and bonsai. Imagine the heaviest burden of global stardom resting entirely on the shoulders of one man, but before he can even begin to carry the weight of millions of expectations, he has to conquer his most formidable enemy, his own duvet. According to the exclusive revelations from their former inner circle assistant, the morning routine of Kim Namjoon, globally revered as RM, the stoic and brilliant leader of BTS, is a hilariously beautiful juxtaposition of profound intellectual depth and borderline catastrophic clumsiness that will leave you both incredibly endeared and slightly concerned. When the morning light finally breaches the heavy blackout curtains of his meticulously curated, art-filled sanctuary, Namjoon doesn't shoot up out of bed like an action hero ready to conquer the charts. Instead, he undergoes a painstakingly slow, almost existential reboot process that closely resembles a sleepy bear trying to remember how to hibernate. The assistant vividly recalls the sheer suspense of standing just outside his door, holding a perfectly brewed iced Americano, listening to a predictable series of morning sound effects: a heavy sigh, the rustling of premium cotton sheets, a sudden thud, and a muffled groan. Because true to his legendary God of Destruction moniker, Namjoon has inevitably stubbed his toe on a priceless mid-century modern nightstand or accidentally knocked his phone onto the hardwood floor while blindly reaching for his glasses. It is fascinating, isn't it, how the mastermind who writes universally acclaimed lyrics and delivers flawless diplomatic speeches at the United Nations is, in his most vulnerable morning state, just a regular 20-something guy who temporarily forgets how his own limbs operate. The assistant revealed that waking Namjoon up is an art form in itself, especially after he has spent the entire night locked inside Archive, his personal studio, relentlessly pouring his soul into track after track until the early hours of dawn. He often falls asleep with a heavy book resting on his chest, surrounded by an intimidating sea of scattered papers, half-empty coffee cups, and dim mood-setting lamps that he forgot to turn off. But the physical and spatial chaos immediately subsides the moment he finally puts his thick-rimmed glasses on, initiating a breathtakingly quiet, introspective ritual that defines his deeply rooted connection to the physical world, a concept fans lovingly call Namjooning. Before he checks Billboard rankings, before he opens urgent messages from Hybe executives, and even before he takes his first sip of caffeine, Namjoon's very first conscious act of the day is deeply nurturing and surprisingly delicate, tending to his beloved collection of bonsai trees. The assistant paints a vivid, almost cinematic picture of this towering, immensely powerful idol standing by his window, clad only in oversized, mismatched pajamas, holding a tiny watering can with the gentleness of a father holding a newborn, whispering soft words of encouragement to his miniature plants. This intimate communion with nature isn't just a quirky hobby, it is a vital psychological anchor, a grounding mechanism that silently pulls him back to reality, reminding him that beneath the blinding glitz, the deafening screams of stadiums, and the unrelenting pressure of global fame, he is fundamentally just Kim Namjoon from Ilsan, a boy who finds extraordinary peace in the ordinary, silent growth of a tiny tree. After the botanical checkup, the morning transforms into a full-blown intellectual immersion. He will literally spend his first 20 minutes awake completely lost in his own philosophical universe, often standing motionless in front of a recently acquired contemporary painting in his living room, staring at the canvas with a level of intense scrutiny and raw emotional vulnerability that completely baffles the staff. The assistant once noted that walking into his room in the morning feels less like entering a superstar's luxury penthouse and more like stumbling into a secluded, slightly disorganized museum curator's study, filled with towering stacks of unread philosophy books, stray architectural magazines, and vinyl records casually scattered across vintage rugs. He deliberately puts on a lo-fi jazz vinyl or some obscure indie acoustic track, letting the mellow sounds wash over the room, creating an impenetrable bubble of peace before the chaotic storm of idle life inevitably breaches his doors. What goes through his brilliantly complex mind during these prolonged moments of absolute morning silence? Is he contemplating the existential themes of their next chart-topping album, unraveling the meaning of human connection, or is he simply trying to remember where he left his favorite wireless earbuds from the night before? The assistant admitted that they often catch him staring blankly at the bathroom wall with a toothbrush hanging from his mouth, completely zoned out, as if his brain is running a million background processes, trying to decode the secrets of the universe while completely neglecting the simple task of dental hygiene. Even his process of picking out an outfit for the day is a spectacle of deep thought mixed with charming indecision. Unlike idols who have every single piece of clothing flawlessly laid out by stylists, Namjoon genuinely loves curating his own art gallery visitor aesthetic, famously digging through piles of earthy-toned cardigans, wide-legged vintage trousers, and obscure streetwear brands, single-handedly turning his walk-in closet into a disaster zone of discarded high-end fabrics. The assistant recalls how he would emerge from his room looking like a perfectly styled bohemian prince, only to immediately ruin the impossibly cool facade by nearly tripping over his oversized sneakers on his way to the kitchen. And let's not forget his morning transit. While others might demand heavily tinted luxury SUVs waiting at the basement, Namjoon's morning often involves stubbornly checking the weather app to see if he can ride his beloved public bicycle, Tarangi, along the Han River before heading to the agency. The image of a global icon wrapped in a giant scarf, sleepily pedaling a public bicycle through the misty Seoul morning while the rest of the world is obsessing over his latest record-breaking music video is a beautiful testament to his unbreakable desire to remain fiercely, unapologetically human. It's this profound duality, the genius lyricist who commands global arenas yet struggles to pour a glass of water without spilling it, the billionaire superstar who finds more joy in watching a leaf sprout than checking his bank account, that makes his unfiltered morning reality so insanely relatable and charming. This quiet, solitary morning hour is his ultimate armor, the sacred time he desperately needs to rebuild his mental fortitude, carefully organizing his sprawling, brilliant thoughts before putting on the heavy, invisible crown of leadership and stepping out into a world that demands perfection at every second. every single clumsy movement, every silent conversation with his plants, and every distant gaze into an abstract painting is a vital piece of the puzzle that makes RM the phenomenal leader he is. But one cannot help but wonder if this is the beautifully chaotic, wildly artistic, and intensely philosophical morning of the stoic leader, what explosive, unpredictable madness could possibly be unfolding in the rooms of the other members just down the hall? Are you absolutely ready to see who wakes up with the unhinged energy of 1,000 suns and turns the peaceful dormitory into a literal battlefield, violently shattering the serene silence that Namjoon fights so incredibly hard to maintain? Number 6. Jin, the worldwide handsome gamer, a symphony of screams and morning feasts. Imagine opening a heavy dormitory door expecting to find a groggy, exhausted pop star, but instead you are instantly blinded by a face so flawlessly symmetrical and radiant that it literally defies the laws of human biology even at 7 in the morning. This is the daily jaw-dropping reality of waking up Kim Sek-jin, famously known across the globe as Worldwide Handsome and the fiercely protective eldest member of BTS. According to the incredibly detailed accounts of their former inner circle assistant, walking into Jin's bedroom is like crossing the threshold into a chaotic, neon-lit cyber cafe that somehow violently collided with the luxurious dressing room of a royal prince. While RM spends his morning in quiet philosophical reflection, Jin's awakening is a spectacular, high-decibel explosion of chaotic energy that shatters the morning silence like a sudden thunderclap. The assistant reveals a hilarious yet incredibly endearing secret. Jin is notoriously known for staying up until the absolute ungodly hours of the morning, fiercely clicking away on his expensive mechanical keyboard, bathed in the glow of dual monitors, deeply engrossed in his lifelong gaming obsession, MapleStory, or fiercely defending his honor in intense multiplayer RPGs with random strangers online. Because of this hardcore nocturnal lifestyle, his morning often begins much later than the rest of society, and waking him up requires a very specific, almost tactical approach from the heavily stressed staff. You do not just gently tap Jin's broad shoulder, you have to mentally prepare yourself for the legendary glass-shattering vocal warm-up that is his signature morning complaint. As the assistant slowly pulls back the heavy blackout curtains, letting the harsh, unforgiving daylight flood the messy room littered with gaming headsets and discarded comfortable clothing, a giant lump under a mountain of plush, pastel-colored blankets, often featuring his own adorable fluffy white alpaca creation, RJ, begins to aggressively squirm. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a loud, dramatic, and hilariously exaggerated "Yeah!" echoes through the entire dormitory hallway, immediately letting every single staff member and sleeping bandmate know that the eldest Hyung is officially, albeit reluctantly, conscious. But here's the specific part that drives the professional makeup artists absolutely insane with jealousy. Despite sleeping for maybe 3 meager hours after an intense caffeine-fueled gaming marathon and clutching a high-tech gaming mouse instead of a teddy bear all night, Jin emerges from his messy cocoon of blankets looking absolutely ethereal. The assistant swears on their very life that Jin's face is completely devoid of standard morning puffiness, his skin impossibly clear, hydrated, and glowing, proving once and for all that his worldwide handsome title isn't just a clever, self-appointed catchphrase. It is a scientifically baffling, heavily documented physical reality. However, his hair is a completely different story, often sticking up in impossible angles like a chaotic bird's nest, providing a hilarious contrast to his flawless face. His first actual movement of the day, after dramatically protesting the very existence of the sun and stretching his incredibly wide shoulders, is a solemn pilgrimage straight to the nearest full-length mirror. Yes, the famous urban legends are entirely true. The assistant vividly remembers standing in the doorway, holding a tray of his essential morning vitamins and a glass of water, while watching this global billionaire icon stare at his own bedhead reflection, nodding with deep, genuine satisfaction and muttering under his breath, "Ah, truly a masterpiece," before giving himself a little confident wink. It sounds utterly ridiculous, almost excessively narcissistic, but those who truly know him understand that this exaggerated self-praise is actually a brilliant, deeply psychological shield. It is a profoundly ingrained coping mechanism that he developed years ago to violently build his own confidence when he first debuted as the visually stunning but vocally insecure member of a hardcore hip-hop group. It is his unique, quirky way of aggressively injecting pure, unadulterated positivity into his bloodstream before facing a ruthless world that constantly scrutinizes his every single move, vocal pitch, and dance step. Once the visual self-affirmation ritual is finally complete, the infamous fake Machni persona is fully activated, and the true morning chaos officially begins. Unlike some seasoned idols who might silently slip into a luxurious silk rab boat, sip hot green tea, and read the morning news, Jin literally storms out of his room wearing the most aggressively mismatched, vibrantly colored pajamas imaginable, immediately turning the peaceful, high-security dormitory into his own personal, noisy playground. The assistant notes that his primary morning mission is hilariously simple: find whoever is already awake and relentlessly bother them until they acknowledge his presence. He will boldly march into the kitchen, his broad shoulders practically taking up the entire doorframe, and start launching a rapid-fire barrage of legendary, groan-inducing dad jokes at the poor, unsuspecting private chef or a half-asleep styling staff member, aggressively demanding to know exactly what is for breakfast while simultaneously and loudly judging their vegetable chopping technique. If he happens to spot one of the younger members, especially the notoriously easy targets like Jimin or Jungkook, trying to quietly enjoy their morning bowl of cereal in peace, he will launch a full-scale tactical assault. He will randomly slap their backs, attempt to steal their food straight from their spoons, and initiate a loud, chaotic bickering match that sounds exactly like two furious, oversized toddlers fighting over a favorite toy. But beneath this incredibly loud, fiercely playful, and slightly obnoxious morning routine lies the deeply moving, largely hidden reality of his crucial role as the eldest brother. The assistant points out a subtle, incredibly touching detail that most cameras completely miss. While Jin is loudly complaining about his joints aching from age or dramatically screaming over a stolen piece of toast, his sharp, observant eyes are constantly darting around the room, silently scanning and assessing the physical and emotional condition of his younger brothers. He is deliberately using his overwhelming loudness and ridiculous, exhausting antics to violently break the heavy, nervous tension in the room, forcing a genuine smile or a much-needed laugh onto the exhausted faces of members who might be quietly crushing under the immense, suffocating pressure of their upcoming stadium tours or highly anticipated comeback schedules. He purposely acts like the youngest, the most immature, specifically so the actual younger members don't have to carry the heavy, paralyzing burden of being serious adults all the time. If he notices that someone looks a bit down, overly stressed, or simply exhausted from a grueling midnight practice, Jin will instinctively pivot his chaotic energy into a loving, incredibly aggressive culinary mission. He will immediately tie a cute apron over his RJ pajamas, fiercely demand the kitchen staff step aside, and take full control of the heavy iron stoves. Watching him cook in the morning is a mesmerizing, action-packed spectacle. He chops fresh vegetables with terrifying expert speed, aggressively seasons boiling pots of traditional kimchi jjigae, and commands the kitchen with the absolute unquestionable authority of a strict Michelin star chef, all while fiercely lecturing the surrounding members about the absolute non-negotiable necessity of eating a hearty breakfast to maintain their stamina for the brutal dance practices ahead. He absolutely will not sit down to eat his own hard-earned meal until he has personally ensured that every single member present has a full, steaming bowl of rice and a hot scoop of his homemade stew placed right in front of them. Number 5. Suga, the terrifying slumber, a silent genius, and the iced coffee ritual. Imagine the sheer, unfiltered terror of pulling the shortest straw among a highly professional group of idol managers, knowing that your sole mission for the morning is to breach the heavily soundproofed fortress of a fiercely guarded musical genius who has famously and repeatedly stated on national television that his ultimate dream in his next life is to simply be an unmoving rock. Welcome to the absolutely terrifying, breath-holding, and fiercely quiet morning reality of Men Yoongi, globally feared and revered as Suga or August D, the razor-sharp lead rapper and deeply introspective core producer of BTS. According to the incredibly detailed and slightly traumatized accounts of their former inner circle assistant, walking towards Yoongi's bedroom door feels exactly like carefully disarming a highly sensitive explosive device, a task that requires immense psychological preparation, absolute silence, and a perfectly brewed, freezing cold iced Americano held firmly in hand as a desperate peace offering. While Jin is actively terrorizing the kitchen and RM is philosophizing over bonsai trees, Yoongi is trapped in a state of cryogenic slumber, completely dead to the outside world because his actual day likely just ended a mere 2 hours ago. The assistant vividly paints the picture of a man who literally sacrifices his own physical health, sleep, and sanity to remain locked inside Genius Lab, his personal, heavily secured studio, meticulously tweaking a single bass line or aggressively writing raw, emotionally devastating rap verses until the sun violently pierces the Seoul skyline. Because his biological clock is permanently locked in a nocturnal, producer-driven time zone, forcing him into the daylight is an act of pure betrayal against his physical body. The awakening ritual is a legendary spectacle of pure tension. The staff member will slowly crack the door open, gently whisper his name into the absolute darkness, and wait for the infamous spine-chilling response. Usually, there is a prolonged, agonizing silence, followed by a deeply raspy, terrifyingly low growl that sounds less like a global pop star and more like an ancient mythical dragon being disturbed from a century-long hibernation. The assistant notes that Yoongi doesn't just wake up, he begrudgingly resurrects himself, slowly rising from his black sheets with his eyes squeezed tightly shut against even the dimmest sliver of hallway light, his signature pale skin looking practically translucent, and his usually perfectly styled hair sticking out in aggressively sharp, chaotic spikes. His morning face is completely unfiltered, puffy, deeply exhausted, and carrying a heavy, permanent scowl that would instantly send rookie idols running in the opposite direction. But here is the massive, profoundly endearing plot twist that only his closest staff and bandmates truly understand. This terrifying morning demeanor is a complete, total facade, a brittle defensive shell protecting the softest, most deeply caring soul in the entire dormitory. The assistant reveals that once Yoongi finally forces his eyes open, his very first action is never to check his own reflection or complain about his schedule. Instead, he silently reaches out a pale, heavily veined hand, wordlessly demanding his iced coffee before his brain can even begin to process human language. He sits on the absolute edge of his bed, utterly motionless, sipping the dark, caffeinated liquid in complete silence for at least 15 straight minutes, staring blankly at a random spot on the floor while his incredibly complex brain slowly boots up. He doesn't do yoga, he doesn't water plants, and he certainly doesn't scream at the sun. He just exists, forcefully pulling himself out of the deep, dark musical abyss of his own mind back into the chaotic reality of being a BTS member. When he finally musters the immense willpower to drag his feet out of his room, his morning walk to the kitchen is a legendary, hilarious shuffle, dragging his favorite comfortable slippers across the hardwood floor with a heavy, dramatic sigh that announces his reluctant arrival to the living world. Upon entering the kitchen, where Jin is already creating a chaotic symphony of loud jokes and clanking pots, Yoongi will simply stand in the doorway, narrowing his tiny, sleep-swollen eyes at the absolute madness unfolding before him, radiating an aura of pure, unadulterated judgment. He won't say a single word, but his deeply disgusted facial expression screams an entire paragraph of "Why are you all like this at this ungodly hour?" Yet this is where his infamous tsundere personality violently shines through, creating a deeply emotional, profoundly touching morning contrast. The assistant vividly recalls watching Yoongi aggressively grumble under his breath about the noise, complaining that his head hurts, only to quietly pull up a chair, grab a spoon, and silently start eating the hot stew Jin prepared, making sure to subtly push the absolute best, most tender pieces of meat towards the plates of a half-asleep Jimin or a deeply exhausted Jungkook without ever making eye contact or saying a single word of affection. He acts like the entire world is an absolute burden, but his intensely sharp, quietly observant eyes are carefully monitoring every single member's physical condition, taking silent mental notes on who looks too tired, who isn't eating enough, and who needs a subtle word of encouragement later during their grueling dance practice. His morning is devoid of any flashy routines or loud declarations of self-love, because his entire existence, his very core, is deeply rooted in raw, silent sacrifice and unspoken dedication to his craft and his chosen family. He carries the heavy, invisible scars of his underground rap days, the crippling anxiety he fiercely documented as August D, and the immense, terrifying pressure of being the musical backbone of a multi-billion-dollar empire, all hidden behind a sleepy, grumpy exterior and a cup of iced coffee. The assistant notes that if you look closely enough during these quiet morning moments, past the heavy scowls and the aggressive silence, you can physically see the immense weight he carries, slowly, painfully putting on his armor for another day of fighting brutal industry standards and delivering masterpieces for millions of fans. Every silent sigh, every slow shuffle, and every secretly caring gesture in the kitchen is a vital, irreplaceable piece of the complex puzzle that makes Min Yoongi the deeply respected, fiercely loved pillar of BTS. But as Yoongi quietly finishes his coffee in the chaotic kitchen, desperately trying to preserve his precious, fleeting morning peace, an entirely different, explosively bright, and almost aggressively positive energy is preparing to burst forth from another room, ready to completely obliterate any remaining traces of silence. Who is the absolute human vitamin that aggressively rejects the concept of a bad morning, whose incredibly loud, perfectly choreographed awakening involves instant, high-energy dancing, and who literally treats the morning sun as their personal spotlight to forcibly force smiles onto their groggy, traumatized bandmates? Are you genuinely prepared to experience the blinding, aggressively cheerful morning routine of the group's legendary dance leader, a man whose sheer, untamed morning enthusiasm is so intensely powerful that it has physically scared members out of their beds? Number 4. J-Hope the Human Vitamin, a symphony of sound effects and the immaculate wardrobe. Imagine bracing yourself for the heavy, suffocating morning gloom that typically plagues a dorm full of exhausted, overworked artists, only to be violently hit by a literal tidal wave of pure, aggressively weaponized optimism that absolutely refuses to let anyone within a 5-mile radius remain sad or sluggish. This is the staggering, eardrum-shattering, and completely unapologetic reality of waking up Jungkook, universally adored as J-Hope, the phenomenally talented dance leader, the razor-sharp rapper, and the officially designated sunshine of BTS. According to the deeply amused yet occasionally overwhelmed former Inner Circle assistant, walking into Hoseok's bedroom is an experience that radically and hilariously contrasts the chaotic, book-filled museum of RM or the pitch-black, deeply terrifying hibernation cave of Suga. Instead, you're stepping into a meticulously organized, impeccably clean, and vibrantly decorated sanctuary that looks exactly like a high-end contemporary art gallery perfectly fused with a luxury fashion boutique. You can instantly smell the expensive, carefully chosen luxury room diffusers that he insists on using to create a perfectly fresh, calming ambiance. Everything in this room has a specific, highly deliberate place, from his perfectly aligned, terrifyingly extensive collection of rare KAWS figurines and brightly colored bear bricks to the spotless glass cases holding his most prized limited edition sneakers. Unlike the other members who require gentle coaxing, fear-inducing silence, or aggressive prodding, J-Hope's awakening is an explosive, self-initiated theatrical performance that requires absolutely no outside intervention. Before the staff can even raise their knuckles to knock on his door, they can already hear the muffled, undeniably iconic sound effects echoing loudly from behind the heavy wood. Pa, pa, pow, whoosh, brr. He literally vocalizes his own morning stretches, aggressively throwing off his perfectly crisp high thread count duvet with the synchronized, snapping precision of a veteran Broadway dancer hitting their center stage mark. It is utterly fascinating and slightly mind-boggling how a man who spends his entire life under the most grueling, physically devastating demands can treat the simple everyday act of getting out of bed as a full-blown choreographic masterpiece. The assistant vividly recounts the sheer absurdity and profound joy of watching Hoseok physically manifest his legendary "I'm your hope, you're my hope" persona the very second his eyes open, repeatedly slapping his own cheeks with rapid, loud smacks to forcefully inject pure adrenaline into his bloodstream and violently shake off the heavy residue of sleep. But do not let this blindingly bright, exaggeratedly goofy morning facade fool you for a single second into thinking he is just a superficial mascot of happiness. Behind the loud sound effects, the bright colors, and the dramatic morning stretches lies one of the most fiercely disciplined, relentlessly perfectionist, and terrifyingly sharp minds in the entire global music industry. The assistant reveals a profound, widely misunderstood, and deeply emotional truth about Hoseok. His endless, overflowing morning energy isn't always natural. In fact, more often than not, it is a deliberate, highly calculated act of profound self-sacrifice and deep empathy. He acutely understands that as the dance leader and the unofficial emotional barometer of the entire group, his mood single-handedly dictates the energy, the focus, and the drive of the entire day. If Hoseok is down, the entire team inevitably sinks into a dark, sluggish mood. If Hoseok is up, radiating power and joy, they feel like they can conquer the absolute world. So even on days when his body is screaming in absolute fiery agony from rehearsing a grueling, high-impact dance break until 3 in the morning, and all he wants to do is collapse into tears of pure exhaustion, he violently forces himself to be the loudest, most aggressively cheerful person in the dormitory. He deliberately suppresses his own profound exhaustion to single-handedly carry the heavy emotional weight of his 6 brothers, acting as their unbreakable pillar of strength before the cameras even start rolling. Once he is vertical, the true, meticulous nature of Jung Hoseok is fully unleashed in a rapid-fire, highly efficient sequence of immaculate grooming and hyper-organized preparation. While the other members are stumbling around the hallways like the Walking Dead or staring blankly at bathroom walls, Hoseok is already executing a flawless 12-step premium skincare routine, vigorously tapping expensive hydrating serums into his flawless, high-cheekboned face while aggressively humming a random heavy hip-hop beat and simultaneously visualizing the complex stage formations for their upcoming concert. His walk-in closet, famously known among the staff as a terrifyingly neat archive of high-fashion streetwear, avant-garde accessories, and outrageously expensive oversized bags, is his next mandatory destination. The assistant notes that watching Hoseok pick his morning outfit is like observing a master painter staring at a blank canvas. He doesn't just carelessly throw on clothes like a normal person, he carefully curates an entire cohesive aesthetic, perfectly matching his vintage bucket hat to the specific colorway of his shoelaces, ensuring that even if he's just going to a sweaty, incredibly unglamorous dance practice in an underground studio, he looks like he just confidently stepped off the runway of Paris Fashion Week. And then comes the legendary high-decibel invasion of the communal spaces. Hoseok literally dances his way down the dormitory hallway, popping and locking his way straight to the kitchen, leaving a bright, chaotic trail of loud, infectious giggles and completely unprovoked sound effects in his wake. When he finally bursts into the kitchen, the dynamic is hilariously cinematic and instantly transformative. He will immediately zero in on the deeply grumpy, fiercely silent Yoongi who is still nursing his iced coffee, purposely leaning in way too close, flashing a blinding million-watt smile, and loudly complimenting Yoongi's painfully messy morning hair with exaggerated enthusiasm just to intentionally elicit a heavy, annoyed groan from the producer. He will playfully slap Jin's famously broad shoulders, loudly harmonize with whatever chaotic, dramatic tune the eldest is belting out over the stove, and aggressively hype up the exhausted younger members, physically shaking their shoulders and violently forcing bright smiles onto their tired faces with his sheer, untamed enthusiasm. He is the ultimate, unstoppable force of nature, a literal human vitamin who forcefully and relentlessly injects blinding light into the darkest, most stressful mornings. Yet beneath this boisterous, ear-splittingly loud and wildly entertaining morning routine, the senior staff always notices a deeply touching hidden detail. His incredibly sharp, intensely observant eyes are constantly darting around the room, silently taking attendance, rigorously checking everyone's physical condition, and secretly memorizing exactly who looks a bit too pale, who is limping slightly from an old ankle injury, and who is going to need extra patient help with the choreography later that grueling afternoon. He is the invisible, unbreakable spine of BTS, holding them completely upright with his infectious laughter and his terrifying, unparalleled discipline. It's a breathtaking, beautiful juxtaposition, the wildly hyperactive, sound effect-making goofball who simultaneously possesses the terrifyingly strict, fiercely observant aura of a veteran dance captain, constantly ensuring that every single member is physically, mentally, and emotionally prepped to face the ruthless, unforgiving machinery of the idol industry. His incredibly loud morning is an absolute masterclass in chosen optimism, a beautiful, defiant rebellion against the crushing, bone-deep exhaustion that constantly comes with being a global icon. Number 3. Jimin, the sleeping angel, a desperate rescue mission, and the stubborn mochi. Imagine an absolute fortress of impenetrable silence, a room where the very concept of time seems to completely dissolve into the heavy, thick air, and where the blindingly bright morning sun is fiercely treated as an unwelcome, highly offensive intruder. Welcome to the notoriously difficult, deeply frustrating, and absolutely endearing morning reality of Park Jimin, the mesmerizing lead vocalist, the breathtakingly elegant main dancer, and the universally cherished angelic fairy of BTS. According to the deeply exhausted, highly seasoned former Inner Circle assistant who has lived to tell the tale, crossing the threshold into Jimin's deeply shadowed, slightly cluttered bedroom is not just a standard morning wake-up call. It is a full-blown, high-stakes tactical rescue mission that requires the absolute patience of a saint, unwavering psychological endurance, and an entire arsenal of gentle but firm persuasion tactics. While J-Hope is already aggressively popping and locking in the hallway, and Jin is screaming loud dad jokes over a boiling pot of stew, Jimin is practically dead to the world, violently buried under a massive, impenetrable mountain of heavy plush blankets, completely ignoring the 5 different blaring alarms he explicitly set the night before. The assistant reveals a hilarious yet incredibly touching truth. Jimin is undeniably the undisputed king of being chronically, unapologetically late, a fiercely stubborn sleeper whose actual waking process is so notoriously difficult that it has literally evolved into an ongoing legendary inside joke among the staff, the members, and millions of fans worldwide. When the brave staff member finally dares to breach his heavy door, they are met with absolute defiant silence. They gently whisper his name, slowly pull back the thick blackout curtains, and playfully tug at the edges of his heavy duvet, only to be met with a deeply muffled, incredibly cute but fiercely resistant whine that sounds exactly like a grumpy toddler desperately refusing to go to kindergarten. He will stubbornly roll over, aggressively wrapping himself even tighter into a human burrito, desperately clinging to his favorite oversized pillows as if his very life depends on it. But why is this specific angelic member so incredibly impossible to wake up? The assistant dives into a deeply emotional, profoundly reflective reality that completely breaks the hearts of those who truly understand him. Jimin's terrifyingly deep slumber is not born from mere laziness. It is the direct, physical consequence of his crippling, unrelenting perfectionism and his deeply ingrained habit of fiercely overworking himself until his body literally shuts down. While the rest of the world is sleeping, Jimin is notoriously known for staying behind in the cold, empty practice rooms, intensely analyzing his own performance videos frame by grueling frame, harshly criticizing his own flawless vocals, and forcefully pushing his body past the absolute limits of human endurance just to ensure he delivers absolute perfection for his beloved fans. His sleep is the only sacred, completely untouchable sanctuary where he can finally escape the immense, suffocating pressure of his own impossibly high standards and the terrifying weight of global expectations. Because of this profound, heartbreaking exhaustion, the staff literally cannot bring themselves to be genuinely angry at his stubborn morning resistance. Instead, they approach his waking process with a deep, overflowing sense of immense protective tenderness. The assistant vividly recounts the sheer, unadulterated chaos of the Jimin extraction protocol, which often requires calling in heavy reinforcements. If the gentle nudging utterly fails, they have to physically bring in the loud, aggressively cheerful J-Hope or the deeply eccentric V to physically tickle him, violently steal his blankets, or loudly sing directly into his ear until he is physically forced to surrender. When Jimin finally agonizingly drags his small, incredibly athletic frame out of his heavy bed, the visual transformation is absolutely staggering and hilariously endearing. Gone is the fiercely intense, seductively confident global pop icon who casually commands massive stadium stages. In his place is a deeply groggy, impossibly soft, and adorably puffy-faced young man, sporting his legendary, highly squishable mochi cheeks and a chaotic, gravity-defying bird's nest of bed hair. He literally stumbles into the hallway like a sleepy, disoriented penguin, his eyes squeezed tightly shut against the harsh dormitory lights, blindly relying on pure muscle memory to find his way to the bathroom. And yet, this is exactly where his fierce, unbreakable professionalism instantly kicks back in. Despite being chronically behind schedule and causing the entire stylist team to collectively hold their breath in pure anxiety, Jimin refuses to rush his meticulous, highly detailed morning grooming routine. The assistant watches in absolute awe as this sleepy, stumbling boy instantly transforms in front of the mirror, carefully applying his expensive lip balm, meticulously fixing his messy hair, and perfectly adjusting his effortlessly chic, oversized designer sweater, because his deep, unwavering love and respect for his fans absolutely dictate that he must look perfectly presentable the moment he steps out of the door. When he finally joins the chaotic, intensely loud atmosphere of the kitchen, his entire demeanor undergoes a breathtaking, incredibly beautiful shift. He doesn't aggressively complain like Yoongi or loudly scream like Jin. Instead, he completely melts into his role as the absolute emotional glue, the soft, affectionate fairy of the group. He will wordlessly shuffle up behind a deeply focused Namjoon or a wildly energetic Jungkook, heavily resting his chin directly on their broad shoulders, wrapping his arms around their waists in a tight, deeply comforting back hug, and physically absorbing their vibrant morning energy like a sleepy, affectionate koala. He quietly accepts a hot bowl of soup from Jin, offering a soft, dazzling eye smile that instantly violently melts away all the deep frustration and heavy stress of the morning rush. His incredible, overflowing empathy is his greatest superpower. Even while half asleep, his highly sensitive emotional radar is actively scanning the room, ready to offer a soft touch, a gentle giggle, or a warm, comforting hug to anyone who looks even slightly overwhelmed by the brutal idol schedule. It is this profound, astonishing duality, the incredibly fierce perfectionist stage genius who pushes himself to the absolute brink of physical destruction, the frustratingly stubborn, hilariously rebellious sleeper who violently fights the morning sun, and the deeply tender, fiercely empathetic angel who single-handedly softens the harsh, metallic edges of the K-pop industry with his gentle hugs that makes Park Jimin's chaotic morning routine so incredibly captivating, deeply moving, and undeniably precious. Every single muffled whine, every stubborn refusal to leave his bed, and every soft, sleepy back hug in the kitchen is a beautiful, deeply human testament to the immense, overwhelming pressure he carries and the boundless, overflowing love he fiercely holds for his chosen family. But as Jimin finally slowly opens his sleepy eyes and softly giggles at J-Hope's chaotic morning dance, a completely different, intensely bizarre, and profoundly eccentric morning reality is quietly unfolding just a few doors down. Who is the wildly unpredictable, deeply soulful member who operates in a completely different dimension, whose deeply artistic awakening process heavily involves blasting classical music, intensely talking to his dog, and staring blankly into space while wearing the most outrageously expensive, heavily patterned silk pajamas imaginable? Are you completely, absolutely ready to step into the incredibly weird, highly aesthetic, and deeply cinematic morning universe of the group's most unpredictable visual genius, a man who literally treats his own morning routine like the opening scene of some obscure, slow-paced French indie film? Number 2. V. The Cinematic Soul, a Jazz Symphony, and the Eccentric Awakening. Imagine opening a heavy door and suddenly stepping out of a chaotic, intensely modern K-pop dormitory and straight into the heavily filtered, incredibly slow-paced, and wildly aesthetic opening scene of an obscure, vintage French indie film. This is the utterly bizarre, deeply mesmerizing, and intensely cinematic morning reality of Kim Tae-young, globally worshipped as V, the baritone-voiced visual masterpiece and the profoundly eccentric, deeply soulful artistic free spirit of BTS. According to the incredibly bewildered yet thoroughly fascinated former Inner Circle assistant, attempting to wake up Tae-young is an experience entirely different from the terrifying, explosive danger of waking Suga or the heavy, desperate physical extraction required for Jimin. Instead, it is a complex exercise in navigating a completely different dimension of time, space, and reality. While the rest of the dormitory is vibrating with J-Hope's aggressively loud sound effects and Jin's screaming high-pitched laughter, Tae-young's heavily decorated, dimly lit bedroom remains an absolute impenetrable sanctuary of vintage aesthetics, classical art, and slow-burn artistry. The assistant describes entering his room as an immediate, overwhelming sensory overload of expensive, woody, niche room sprays, burning incense, and the distinct, warm, nostalgic crackle of a vintage vinyl record spinning endlessly on a high-end retro turntable. Long before his beautifully long-lashed, heavily lidded eyes even flutter open, Tae-young's morning explicitly begins with the deeply soothing, melancholic sounds of classical music, a heavy jazz trumpet solo by Chet Baker, or an obscure, sweeping orchestral piece gently flooding his sleeping space, deliberately setting a profoundly dramatic, movie-like atmosphere for his awakening. When the brave staff member finally approaches his massive, incredibly messy bed, they do not find a violently thrashing idol or a grumpy superstar. They find a breathtakingly ethereal being wrapped entirely in the most outrageously expensive, heavily patterned, brilliantly colored matching designer silk pajamas, looking absolutely flawless, as if he literally went to sleep posing for a high-end luxury fashion magazine editorial. But here is exactly where the legendary, uniquely hilarious Tay-Tay eccentricity fully and undeniably takes over, completely shattering any illusion of a normal morning routine. Unlike a normal human being who wakes up and immediately checks their smartphone for urgent messages or stumbles blindly to the bathroom to brush their teeth, Tae-young undergoes a notoriously prolonged, deeply fascinating, and slightly baffling phase known universally among fans and veteran staff members as blank Tae. The assistant vividly recounts standing there in absolute awe, holding his perfectly measured morning vitamins and a glass of room-temperature water, while Tae-young slowly sits up in bed, completely ignoring the staff member's presence, and literally stares absolutely blankly into the empty space of the opposite wall for 20 to 30 straight minutes. He's physically awake, his stunningly symmetrical face bathed in the soft golden morning light filtering through the expensive curtains, but his incredibly complex, deeply creative, and highly abstract mind is still violently drifting through the cosmos, completely detached from all earthly responsibilities. He isn't being intentionally rude, lazy, or dismissive. He is simply operating on a fundamentally different, significantly slower frequency than the rest of the hyper-capitalist, brutally fast-paced world, actively taking his time to mentally process his vivid dreams, his complex artistic visions, and the very philosophical concept of his own existence before he can fully commit to putting on the heavy, suffocating crown of a global superstar for the day. This aggressively slow, fiercely protected morning ritual is not just a quirky habit, it is a profound, incredibly vital psychological shield for his deeply sensitive, highly empathetic soul. In a cutthroat industry that brutally demands relentless speed, robotic precision, flawless choreography, and instant calculated reactions to every single flashing camera, Taehyung's aggressively slow, heavily romanticized morning routine is his silent, beautiful rebellion, a desperate, deliberate attempt to forcefully hold on to his pure, unadulterated artistic humanity. He will casually sit there, raising his face to his hands, forming a small rectangle with his incredibly long, elegant fingers, and literally frame the morning light hitting his bedroom wall as if he is capturing a photograph through the lens of his beloved vintage film cameras, silently channeling his famous photographer alter ego, Vante, before he even speaks his very first word of the day. Once his wandering soul finally returns to his physical body, the heavy silence is usually broken by a soft, incredibly deep, morning gravelly voice affectionately cooing not at the stressed managers, but to his absolute best friend, literal shadow, and true soulmate, his famously adorable, utterly pampered, and fiercely loyal black and tan Pomeranian, Kim Yen-tan. The assistant notes with deep amusement that Taehyung will literally hold full, deeply serious multi-sentence conversations with his tiny dog, softly explaining the complex, grueling schedule for the day to the blinking puppy, as if Yen-tan is his strict personal manager, before aggressively peppering the dog with a million gentle, loud kisses. When he finally decides to grace the intensely loud, chaotic communal living room with his presence, he doesn't just walk, he elegantly and slowly glides in like a displaced, highly eccentric aristocrat prince, still wearing his flowing designer silk pajamas, perfectly holding a fancy glass of water as if it were a priceless chalice of vintage wine. He casually strolls into the kitchen, his deep, incredibly soulful eyes silently scanning the chaotic, screaming war zone created by Jin's flying spatulas, J-Hope's loud clapping, and Jimin's sleepy back hugs, and offers a slow, boxy, incredibly endearing smile that instantly shifts the entire energetic frequency of the heavily stressed room. He will softly mumble a greeting in his famous, uniquely constructed Tay-Tay vocabulary, a highly idiosyncratic way of speaking that often jumbles standard Korean grammar and invents completely new, abstract words, leaving the seasoned managers and even his own bandmates desperately trying to decipher if he is asking for a simple piece of strawberry toast or philosophically questioning the intricate meaning of breakfast itself. He will peacefully sit right in the middle of the loud, explosive madness, slowly chewing his food with the unbothered, absolute serenity of a meditating monk, occasionally reaching out to gently stroke Jungkook's messy hair with a deeply affectionate, brotherly touch, or offering a completely random, profoundly deep observation about a uniquely shaped cloud he saw outside the window, completely ignoring the urgent, frantic energy of the managers who are frantically checking their luxury watches. His incredibly bizarre, deeply aesthetic morning is a stunning, beautiful masterclass in refusing to be consumed and rushed by the heavy, suffocating machinery of absolute fame. Every single blank stare, every vintage jazz record crackle, every deeply serious conversation with his tiny dog, and every slow, dramatic sip of water is a crucial, deeply emotional mechanism that allows his incredibly unique, vibrantly colorful artistic mind to survive the sterile, high-pressure, and often ruthless environment of global superstardom. But as Tae-young peacefully sips his water, completely lost in his own beautifully slow cinematic universe, a terrifyingly active, wildly competitive, and astonishingly energetic force is violently breaking a heavy sweat in the final, heavily equipped room of the dorm. Number 1. Jungkook, the Golden Powerhouse, a brutal workout, and the protein obsession. Imagine the sheer, unadulterated shock of bracing yourself for the typical groggy morning resistance of an overworked pop star, only to open a bedroom door and instantly step into what looks and sounds exactly like an elite, high-performance Olympic training facility operating at absolute peak capacity. This is the intensely intimidating, heavily protein-fueled, and wildly explosive morning reality of Jungkook, globally worshipped as the Golden Maknae, the powerhouse main vocalist and the fiercely competitive, heavily tattooed youngest brother of BTS. According to the absolutely stunned, deeply exhausted former Inner Circle assistant, while Jimin is violently fighting the concept of consciousness, Yoongi is trapped in a dark hibernation cycle, and Tae-young is slowly staring at a wall in a vintage French film trance. Jungkook's morning routine violently shatters the piece with the raw, untamed energy of a supernova going off in a confined space. His bedroom setup alone is a terrifyingly accurate reflection of his extreme, uncompromising personality. The assistant describes opening his door to a room that completely ignores standard luxury furniture conventions. Instead of a standard designer bed, Jungkook famously prefers sleeping on a massive, highly specific arrangement of premium mattresses placed directly on the hardwood floor, surrounded by a heavy, humming army of high-tech air purifiers, intense humidifiers, and dozens of heavily scented diffusers that create a thick, aggressively fresh atmosphere. But the most jarring detail is that waking him up doesn't require gentle whispers, fear-inducing peace offerings, or physical extraction teams. It barely requires an alarm. Jungkook's internal biological clock operates with the terrifying, relentless precision of a military-grade machine. The very second his large, doe-like eyes snap open, there is absolutely zero lag time, no groggy buffering phase, and no philosophical contemplation of existence. He goes from 0 to a staggering 100% battery life in a literal fraction of a second. The assistant vividly recalls the sheer disbelief of walking into his room at 6 in the morning, only to find the heavily tattooed superstar already completely out of bed, shirtless, aggressively doing one-handed push-ups on the floor, or rigorously stretching his incredibly muscular frame using the professional-grade resistance bands he permanently keeps securely attached to his heavy bedroom door frame. He treats the early morning not as a time for gentle recovery or slow artistic awakening, but as a brutal, highly disciplined opportunity to violently push his physical limits to the absolute maximum. But the intense physical exertion is only the very first layer of his wildly unhinged morning reality. Before the heavy sweat has even fully formed on his brow, the absolute most mind-boggling phenomenon occurs. The legendary crystal-clear main vocal pipes are instantly activated. While most normal human beings struggle to form coherent sentences or speak above a raspy whisper in the early hours, Jungkook will literally start belting out impossibly high, perfectly pitched ad-libs, aggressively singing full-volume R&B runs, or flawlessly covering complex international pop songs while actively doing jumping jacks in his bedroom. It is a terrifying, awe-inspiring display of raw, unfiltered natural natural talent and terrifying stamina that leaves the seasoned vocal coaches and managers completely speechless, proving undeniably that his golden title is not just a clever marketing gimmick, but a scientifically terrifying biological reality. Once his heavy bedroom workout is finally complete, he literally bounds down the dormitory hallway with the heavy, thudding footsteps of an excited golden retriever trapped in the body of an elite heavyweight boxer. His immediate, non-negotiable destination is the kitchen, where he instantly adds to the chaotic, screaming symphony already established by Jin and J-Hope by firing up the loudest, most aggressive industrial blender known to mankind. The assistant notes with a mixture of horror and deep amusement that Jungkook's breakfast doesn't consist of normal things like toast or cereal. Instead, he meticulously crafts a terrifying, highly optimized sludge of heavy protein powder, various supplements, milk, and sometimes even raw eggs or chicken breasts, chugging the thick, intimidating concoction with absolute, unblinking determination. Yet beneath this terrifyingly intense, heavily muscled, and aggressively loud morning routine lies a profoundly touching, deeply emotional reality that perfectly captures the true, vulnerable essence of Jungkook. Why does he push himself so brutally hard every single morning? The assistant reveals that his relentless, burning pursuit of absolute physical and artistic perfection is heavily driven by a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude, intense loyalty, and a slightly heartbreaking fear of ever becoming a burden to his 6 older brothers. Having joined the grueling, unforgiving idol industry at the incredibly tender age of 15, his entire identity, his core belief system, is fundamentally built on the profound desire to proudly carry the massive weight of his Hung's legacies. He forcefully builds his muscles and tirelessly perfects his vocals at ungodly hours because he views his strength as a literal physical shield designed to deeply protect the older members from the crushing, exhausting pressures of their global tours. When he finally sits down at the kitchen table, aggressively clutching his massive shaker bottle of protein, the intense, intimidating aura of the heavy-lifting athlete instantly melts away, replaced by the incredibly soft, bright-eyed, and endlessly endearing youngest brother. Despite possessing the physical strength to literally bench press half the group, he will immediately bow his head respectfully to a screaming Jin, happily let a deeply spaced-out Taeyoung casually play with his messy morning hair, and stare at the quiet, intellectual Namjoon with eyes full of pure, unadulterated adoration, hanging on to the leader's every single word as if it were absolute gospel. He will loudly giggle at J-Hope's chaotic sound effects and gently nudge a heavily sleeping Jimin, offering a massive bunny-toothed smile that instantly injects a massive wave of pure, innocent joy into the heavily stressed, deeply exhausted atmosphere of the dormitory. It is this astonishing, profoundly beautiful duality, the terrifyingly disciplined, wildly competitive, protein-chugging beast who treats the morning like a brutal Olympic decathlon, perfectly fused with the fiercely loyal, incredibly gentle, and deeply affectionate baby brother who desperately wants nothing more than to make his chosen family proud, that makes Jungkook's explosive morning routine so completely captivating and emotionally devastating. As all 7 incredibly distinct, wildly contrasting personalities finally converge in the kitchen, Namjoon silently contemplating existence over bonsai trees, Jin aggressively screaming over a boiling pot of stew, Yoongi fiercely scowling into his iced coffee, Jose beatboxing while executing flawless choreography, Jimin offering soft, sleepy back hugs to anyone in reach, Taeyoung blankly analyzing the cosmos through an imaginary camera lens, and Jungkook happily chugging heavy protein after a brutal workout, the true, unbreakable magic of BTS is beautifully, undeniably revealed. They are a wildly chaotic, completely unhinged, and deeply dysfunctional family of globally worshipped superstars who somehow, against all odds, perfectly balance each other out, drawing immense strength, deep comfort, and endless inspiration from their messy, beautiful human realities before stepping out the door to completely conquer the world all over again.